Who's number one? Well, let's get a lesson in it. Campus Pride, which advocates for LGBTQ plus inclusivity and safety at U.S. colleges and universities, released its annual worst list, naming 180 colleges and universities as, quote, the absolute worst, most unsafe campuses for LGBTQ youth. This year's list adds 50 new names since last year, the most extensive update since the list started in 2015. The list includes colleges and universities that have either received or applied for a religious exemption to Title IX, a federal law that protects students from discrimination in federally funded schools, or have demonstrated history of anti-LGBTQ plus policies, programs, and practices. The worst list is in alphabetical order rather than rank, but some schools have appeared on it more often than others. David Shill, a 22-year-old junior at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, said he isn't surprised that his school is on the list again because, quote, things haven't changed, end quote. BYU is owned by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as the Mormon Church. They forbid same-sex dating. Though it doesn't specifically mention transgender students in the student handbook, the church counsels against medical transition for trans people. Otherwise, they face restricted participation in church and even excommunication.
David, you digested Campus Pride's survey of these 180 schools. What did you feel about the list that you saw?
But they definitely try not to take sides, but they also definitely made it clear that BYU is the biggest offender. For example, David Shill, who we quoted in the story, is the head of the BYU Pride organization, which is not allowed to exist on campus officially and have to have all their meetings and everything off campus because BYU refuses to allow an LGBT group or club to exist on campus, which is a perfect example of what their issue is. Many other colleges were in there. There were a lot of new additions. The one that the Liberty University, of course, was on there also is a really bad one. But, you know, the Mormon Church, it seems like sometimes they're taking strides to go the right way, but sometimes they're not. And BYU just like refuses to even attempt
I'm curious. I haven't looked at the list. Did any in Florida make it?
Oh, yeah. I'm mostly smaller schools, not the bigger ones, but yeah. There are several small religious universities here in Florida that were on the list.
I think all 180 have some connection to a religious affiliation or something like that. And let's be clear, when you say a Title IX, you know, a religious exemption, no, it's an exemption to allow you to discriminate under the cover of a religious umbrella. That's what it is. They say, oh, it's about religious freedom, but too often, not in all cases, but too often, your religious freedom just stomps on my basic rights to exist, to get an education. So.
You know, in the current, in this upcoming session of the Supreme Court, they're specifically going to take on this question of how discrimination balances with religious freedom. I hope the justices, they likely will not, but I hope the justices will transport themselves, especially Clarence Thomas, I hope they will transport themselves to 1959 and get into a time machine and step out of the time machine and realize that about 75% of all of the Baptist churches in the South in 1959 claimed religious exemption for anything that had to do with discrimination against black people. And the conclusion was, you can't discriminate against black people. But it took a decade more of fighting to go, no, that is completely illegitimate. That's where we are. It's 1959 in the churches of America and religious schools in America for LGBT. We will win this fight. We will win this fight, but it may take a decade.
So you're more optimistic than a lot of people.
Yeah, well, remember in 1959, the black community wasn't very optimistic either. But we have to keep fighting. That's our only choice. We keep fighting. LGBTQ plus news is vital for our community and for the broader world as a whole. We have enough enemies at Fox News. Tucker, Sean, and Laura are loud. We need passionate allies. Happening Out Television Network, Queer News Tonight, and It's Happening Out are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. Our community needs your support. Like this broadcast and subscribe now to ensure the growth of the entire LGBTQ